Most people who buy a talisman don't understand what they're holding. They've purchased a fancy piece of jewelry with a fun story attached, not a carefully crafted divine tool imbued with the celestial marrow of the heaven. The difference between these two things is the difference between holding a rock and working with the spirit of the planetary hierarchies themselves. Over the last 9 years, I have made nearly 500 talismans from the tradition of astrological talismans present in Picatrix, Agrippa's 3 books of occult philosophy, and Ficino's 3 books on life. I've also seen what happens when talismans are made poorly, or worse, sold deceptively. This video is about helping you make sure you never spend money on something that was never a talisman, that was never alive to begin with. Now let me start with the foundation, because without this, the rest of the video will not make any sense. A talisman, as I'm referring to it, in this tradition of the grimoires Picatrix and Agrippa's 3 books of occult philosophy, refer to a ritually ensouled object at a specific moment of astrological time, called an election. At this time, the talisman is engraved with specific symbols, using specific materials, and following a unique ritual procedure involving incense and herbs in order to create this talisman, essentially giving birth to the talisman at this time. This is why we say a talisman is an ensouled object in this tradition. Just in the same way, humans, when we're born, we have soul. This tradition also asserts that each one of these specific steps matter. Remove one of materials, incense, ritual procedures, or make enough mistakes. Remove one of these essential components, and instead of a glorious astrological talisman, you have a fun little craft project. When looking to buy or make an astrological talisman from these traditions, it's important to understand what it is and what it is not. And it's this distinction where, a lot of the times in the marketplace, sellers and providers fail you. A piece of metal with a planetary sigil or glyph stamped on it, with a paragraph explaining to you its deep meaning, does not make a talisman. A picture of a lion is not a lion. A lion has teeth and fangs and has a certain presence about it. And a ring that has never been consecrated and ensouled during a proper astrological election with correct materials, prayers said over it, is not a talisman, even though it may be talisman shaped. Now, let's say you've decided to buy a real astrological talisman. How do you decide which one to buy? There are 2 fundamental frameworks I like to use when answering this question. Number 1 has to do with what is your core desire? Maybe let's say, what is your true will? Something that goes beyond mere intention and starts to articulate the result you're wanting to accomplish in your life with the talisman. And we need to go beyond vibes, beyond what's nice to have. Picatrix gets very specific about the kinds of results one can attain with the astrological talisman. Heck, I even have case studies on 7 astrological talismans I've made and the truly transformative results they've been able to lend to me in my practice of this magic. We need to align our goals with the powers the planets are said to provide. The sun gives authority, leadership, and the ability to attract the masses to one's ideas. Venus is going to promote harmony, beauty, longevity, and artistic expression, not protection in legal battles. It's Mars who governs litigation, victory, and courageous action. If you ask Venus to help you win a court case, you've potentially chosen a suboptimal spirit to help you achieve your goal. The failure to attain a result isn't due to any problem in the talisman or the election per se, but more of a failure of the selection process one uses to pick a talisman. We want to make sure our expected result aligns with the purpose of the talisman, which can also depend on what the maker intended when they ensouled it during the election. The second framework to overlay onto this process has to do with aligning the talisman to one's natal chart. Now, I'm about to say something that may make talismanic sellers a little uncomfortable, and yes, I know and understand there's always exceptions to general rules and principles. But I'll say it here, not everyone should be using one of every kind of talisman. There are some talismans that are better suited to individuals based off of their natal chart and what they tend to do day in, day out in their lives. I think this is something that is better articulated in Iranian, Vedic, and Tibetan forms of astrological magic that have a more robust set of tools and analyses and diagnostics for determining one's natal relationship to various forms of astrological magic, including talismans. Consider if a planet rules malefic houses in your natal chart. 6, 8, 12, houses of obstruction, enemies, loss. Wearing a talisman that lords those houses could be bringing more of those qualities into your life, rather than helping you achieve your goal. Thus, you end up in a situation where you end up amplifying the problems in life you're trying to escape, which no one wants. Also consider the general dignity of the planet in your chart. Even for someone who is in Aries or Scorpio rising, where Mars should be quite friendly to us. If the Mars is heavily afflicted in the natal chart, a Mars talisman could bring more obstacles, confrontation, and challenging situations that the individual may not have the power to overcome. The talisman has brought them the areas of life, the circumstances to find tremendous success. And because it's Mars, and Mars is giving us martial situations and circumstances for us to rise in power and conquest, if we don't feel comfortable with using the tools of Mars, we're not going to be able to find success. We're going to be bogged down by it instead. As one begins to wrap their heads around these principles, it becomes quite clear the importance of getting outside counsel to help evaluate which talisman is better for one person versus another. For instance, I'm going to disclose something that many practitioners feel is too private to disclose publicly, and that is about my own chart as it pertains to astrological magic. For me, Mars rules a mix of both benefic and dark houses, indicating it could produce mixed results. But I have made a Mars talisman, which I've talked about in my case study videos quite thoroughly, that produced tremendously powerful and life-changing results. How is this possible? Well, I understood the risks. I could see in the election the areas of life the talisman should be affecting, and I organized my material circumstances appropriately so I could handle the effects that may be coming because of the election. I also elected a time that emphasized Mars's courtly and strategic aspects rather than his wild battlefield level aspects. I was also under life circumstances that truly demanded the level of expertise and skills that Mars had to offer, and that could be particularly brought out using amethyst, a unique Mars material. I share this because there is a common rule. If a planet is afflicted in the natal chart, do not use their talismans. And that's good for users of talismans. But as makers of talismans, I think through the lens of astrology, we should be able to see what will happen before it does with the astrological chart. If the person selling you a talisman cannot or refuses to have a conversation about how the planetary energies that they have harnessed in the talisman is probably going to interact with you, your natal chart, and the life that you live, this is indeed a warning sign. This knowledge and these methods are knowable and learnable. And if one is stepping into the role of talisman maker, we should have this level of understanding to provide guidance for our clients.